Aloha and welcome to Hawaii Tropical Botanical Gardens Conversations in the Garden. In today's episode, we have one of our gardeners, Brayden, who will be talking to us about orchids, some rare species found in the garden, the perfect growing conditions, pollination, and some fun facts. In today's episode of Conversations in the Garden, orchids.
Hello everyone, I'm Alexis.
And I'm Brayden.
So in the garden we have a section dedicated to orchids known as the Orchid Garden. Can you tell us a little bit about that area?
Oh, of course I can. So I would honestly say that's one of our biggest appeals. You know, we are the Orchid Isle here on the Big Island. And so just this little area of our garden alone has over 250 species of orchids, always some in bloom. And it's really fantastic area, and just the sheer amount of variety and the effort that has been put in over time, you get something that I myself haven't quite seen in other places there.
So there are many different species of orchids in the garden, like cattleyas, dendrobiums, phalaenopsis, bulbophyllums, epinendrums, and many more. What would be your favorite of all of them?
Oh, that's a tough question, just with how many there are to choose from. But in my opinion, I would have to say it's the Darwin orchid, just really for the history and role it's played in science, really. So it's originally from Madagascar there, and throughout Darwin's travels, he came across the Darwin orchid, of course, before it was named after him there, but it had its large flower, and deep within it, in the recesses of it, that's where the nectar was at, and he couldn't quite understand how it was getting pollinated. So time went on, and eventually it was discovered there was a hawk moth in their same region with a tongue almost 3 times the size of its body, and it was later observed the hawk moth was what was feeding on the nectar and pollinating the Darwin orchids, and is the main reason how Darwin orchids have spread throughout and how they continue to reproduce there, and which eventually tied together the whole theory and impacts a lot of the science that we have today, really. And of course, it's a beautiful flower. It's one of my favorites in the occasions it does bloom. It's actually spectacular and stands out very much so.
Interesting. So can the Darwin's orchid be pollinated in Hawaii?
Actually, it cannot. We do not have the hawk moth in Hawaii itself, but the Darwin flower will still bloom and grow out here.
Okay, so if we don't have the hawk moth on the islands, how do orchids in general get pollinated?
So there tends to be 3 ways, and this is where orchids can get a little bit tricky, but also some of the most interesting ways. So they have the reward strategy, which is your standard, there's food here, come to it, you get it, and then all the little shimmying you do getting to the food is what eventually pollinates the plant. There's some other ones there, like the deception strategy, where there's no reward at all. It gets fooled into the same process there. Essentially the same thing happens, but the orchid just isn't quite as giving and doesn't actually give anything to the pollinator there. But then you have also the trap strategy, where it'll have the nectar in there inside the flower, and a bug will usually crawl down into a recess where there's only one way out, and it's a trap, it's a struggle. Like, I've heard of certain types of orchids where it can take a bee 3 days to escape its flower there just by shimmying and struggling out. But in that process, all the wiggling and gets all its pollen all over it, and there's even some instances where the bee will go back to its hive and absolutely drenched in this pollen, and then just through moving around out there and among its colony, all of these bees will now have a little bit of it on them, just go fall back into another trap and struggle to crawl its way out again. And it's this cycle that really has a good efficiency rate on how it's pollinated, just from the time that the insect or pollinator will be inside the flower there.
Wow, that is a lot. So for people who are trying to grow orchids at home, how would we pollinate them? What would be the best suggestion?
I'm sorry to say, nature is not going to be working with you on this one. A lot of it is going to be hand pollination, so you may have to find an instrument that's like your tongue 3 times the size of your body to get down into your Darwin orchid, or just brushes are often ways, but you'll want to really lap the flowers, just brush along the centers of the orchids and then find your next one and continue brushing along them there. But you're going to really have to put in a little bit of manual labor for this one.
From the way it sounds like we'll be spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to keep the orchids alive than trying to pollinate them.
Yeah, absolutely there. So orchids are epiphytic, so it's not quite like your normal plant where you stick it in the ground and he goes. Mind you, some orchids can, but the ones we tend to have in our house aren't quite that way. So Well, they'll often be in a medium where it's such as bark or sphagnum moss, and why this is because their natural habitat is actually attaching onto the trunks of trees there. So they like a lot of aeration in their roots, and really to have something to kind of grasp onto is a really big part of it there. So mimic essentially being on the side of a tree, water rolling down quickly, rolling off, so it doesn't get drenched in water by any means, but it still has a constant supply of it constantly coming through there.
That's very interesting. So, along with all of the work that has to get put into it, do you have any fun facts about the orchids?
Oh, so I always think that the epiphytic aspect is one of the most interesting things about them, because not a lot of people realize you can just stick a plant on a tree and it'll grow. But seeing how we already discussed that, there's actually orchids that are alive for over 100 years, which is very intriguing because it's no tree. The plant only gets yay big usually there. So for it to be many times older than we are is rather interesting to me there. And some other ones are like just the varieties, like how you can like combine them, the hybridization. It's one of the most in-depth plant species, studied species there. Like, I've got some coworkers who've told me that you can spend as much time learning all the other plants in this garden as you would just trying to understand orchids. The variety, the ways of pollination, it's really a whole maze of just knowledge that you can really get invested into. And some of the smartest botanists that I've come across didn't really know that much about other plants, but they were absolutely invested in orchids and had a wealth of knowledge that every fact was just absolutely something new and something refreshing that you don't get unless you really dedicate the time to learning this field of botany.
That's very interesting indeed. Orchids truly are a beautiful species of plants. They come in so many different sizes, so many different smells. They climb trees. They are an overall true beauty for sure.
Oh, absolutely there's a reason why they have such a reputation and why they're so commonly spread in households. While most of you listening probably have come across some orchids in your life there. They're fantastic species of plant.
So we mentioned before that there are many different species of orchids. What would be the most common?
Oh, so I'd definitely say the most common is Phalaenopsis orchid. This is the kind that you're going to see at a lot of your nurseries, grocery stores. In fact, here, I'll just show you. So this guy here, this is our Phalaenopsis, just one of the many different varieties and hybridizations of them. But you really want to accentuate this pattern because almost all of them share the same or flower structure here. And probably recognize them there, Safeway, all your grocery stores, they often have them all sitting out in the front. But they're really common because their blooms last so long, often in the range of even 3 to 6 months these will bloom for, and frequent bloomers as well. And also, just not to mention the hybridization that has gone on with them because of how hardy they are and how easy they are to grow in terms of orchids, that nurseries and producers and botanists have been able to hybridize so many different ones together that you get some fantastic designs such as this guy here. Yeah, and as you walk through the garden, you'll find these guys stuck all over the trees, even some kind of in the ground there. And just because how many different varieties you are, you may see the same flower structure many times, but it's going to be very hard to find the same flower colors and patterns as many times as they are all spread throughout here.
So it's safe to say that a lot of the orchids we see in the garden will be unique in its own sense.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's what makes orchids so appealing in the first place there. It's just the varieties. You can mix these Phalaenopsis with Bulbophyllums, with Cattleyas even, and you get a whole nother almost species of orchids just going through that. And really, as all this effort has been put in by so many smart people, really, and so many dedicated people, generations have been growing orchids that every nursery is even going to be a different kind of orchid. It's really such a unique field of botany, of such a unique plant there that you can spend a lifetime instead. There's such a depth to it, and that's uniqueness shows up in every single flower that we come across.
So would it be safe to say that Hilo, or the Big Island, has its own unique set of orchids as well?
Oh, I can almost guarantee it there. Just with some of the nurseries and the family-run businesses that have gone around here, you may not have the name advertised in another country, but I guarantee that their orchid, they have something special that's only unique to their family, to their region, to their business there. And yeah, it's another thing that makes it absolutely fantastic there.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about orchids and really explain the process, the lens, and the rewards that come from caring from orchids. But that is all the time we have for today on our conversations with the garden, orchids. Thank you, Brayden.
Oh, and thank you, Alexis. Remember to like and subscribe and catch us for our next episode. Thanks.
Mahalo for joining us today for Conversations in the Garden, Orchids. If you have any suggestions on what you'd like to see next, please leave a comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel and follow us on social media. Link is in the description. Stay tuned for our next episode.